Hi.
Hi.
How was your weekend?
It was good. What happened? It was my mom's birthday party and my aunt's. I made a 3-layer cake. It's a well-loved cake recipe from Sally's Baking Addiction. It's chocolate with chocolate buttercream frosting,
Yum.
chocolate ganache on top, and then also in between the layers, there's a raspberry filling and raspberries on top. You've had this for your birthday.
Yes,
before.
I have, and it is incredible.
It's amazing.
It's
so
a labor
moist.
of love, too.
It's a labor of love.
How long did it take you to make it for your mom and aunt?
It was a 2-day endeavor for me.
What? Why?
I prepped a lot of it.
Oh, that's good. Did it look pretty at the end?
Looked beautiful.
Because I always hate that part of baking when you are looking at a photo and you think that's what mine's going to come out looking like, and then it doesn't.
Really?
It feels like all of your hours of work have been a waste.
Yeah.
But maybe that's a me problem.
Well, I love following a recipe, especially with a scale. Like, I love being this amount of grams. So it, honestly, if I'm being real, since I got a scale, it usually comes out how it's supposed to.
Okay. I think it's on me because I definitely
You're
don't have a scale.
so the type to be like, that seems right.
This is why I'm not a baker, because I'm not precise enough. Yet, just let the record show, I didn't do badly in my science class, my lab
Lord
classes.
knows you succeeded.
I had to carefully measure using pipettes and stuff like that. So,
how was your weekend?
It was good. Luis and I went down to Palm Springs to watch Indian Wells, the tennis tournament down there, and it was an undertaking to get there and even to come home. Because Friday night we're in the Uber on the way to the airport, and we get out of the car, and for some reason, this is crazy, multiple times leaving the house I said, do you have your wallet? I never asked Luis if he has his wallet, but I asked multiple times. Okay. We get to the airport, we get out of the Uber, and all of a sudden Luis can't find his wallet, and he's like, it must be in the Uber.
At the counter?
No, when we on the curb, we're standing on the curb.
Oh God, it was that close.
So Luis goes, okay, it must be in the Uber. So we call the Uber, and he says, no, it's not in here. And so then Luis is like, okay, maybe I just left it at home. We were both kind of scrambling to get out because we'd been working, whatever. And we're like, okay, there's literally, we can't get on a flight without a wallet. So we go in, we talk to the guy at the counter. He's super nice. He's like, you would not imagine how often this happens.
Yeah.
We cancel our flight. We get a full refund. We book for the following day.
Full refund? How did that, to use?
Sorry, full
tour.
credit.
Yeah,
full credit. So we get back into an Uber and we go home, and it ends up being this 2-hour long wild goose chase.
Yeah.
Honestly, ended up being totally fine. And the Uber actually did have the wallet the entire time, which is this whole other element of frustration, but it's not his fault. Anyway, the thing I wanted to tell you about is that huge joke between Luis and one of his best friends in the entire world from Venezuela, David, is that they both travel this way. They both are constantly total type B travelers, constantly leaving things in Ubers. The historic story from this past summer is that Luis and I showed up at the airport. Luis had thought David had bought our plane tickets. Don't know why David would have bought our plane tickets. And we literally did not have a plane ticket for a flight that we were supposed to get on in an hour. So there's a huge joke that we called David and Luis Travel Agency. Try it if you dare, because you never know what adventure you're going to get on if you trust them with your travel plans. So we send David a text, and we're like, I said, I think this is the lowest David and Luis Travel Agency has ever gone. Truly not being able to get on the flight. And David goes, no, this just shows our power is limitless. You don't know what's going to come next.
You never know.
And we ended up getting there the next day early in the morning, and it was totally fine. So it was just really funny.
Wait, I forgot to share. I introduced my niece and nephew this weekend. We had a sleepover.
Fun.
I introduced them to One Direction. Most importantly, Harry Styles. My niece goes, I like the one in the middle. I'm like, yeah, you and the whole world, honey.
Good taste.
It's so funny. I was thinking, what is it about Harry? Is it the symmetry of his face? What is it about him that even a 7-year-old girl knows he's the cutest one?
My sister saw him live and said he walked out on stage, and she was in a massive arena. I want to say it was in Madison Square Garden. Yeah. And she says she has never felt a more magnetic presence in her aura ever.
Wow.
I think there's just something about him.
There's something about him.
Yes.
It's so funny. We watched the James Corden carpool karaoke with them. They were eating it up. Mason was literally 45 degrees inclined toward the TV, obsessed with these boys. It was so cute. And I told them that if they get really into Harry Styles' new album, that I would take them to see him.
Wow, that would be core memory for them.
I know. It's I'm really the winner here, but
no, you are. Totally. Fun. Okay, so today's episode is on vulnerability in the age of social media. It's our 9th episode total and the 4th episode in our second mini-series, Working Together, Elements of Interpersonal Relationships. A way I wanted to get into this episode today is talking about a recent vulnerable moment that I had on the internet, and you did too.
Your
but
very
it shook
first.
me to my core. Yeah, because it was my very first, it shook me to my core.
Just so everyone knows, T is rather offline.
But I'm not a
You're
monk.
not fully. No, you're not a monk. You're not a monk, but you're like millennial kind of vibes in the sense that you're like on Reels, but you don't venture over to TikTok, and like that would be a bridge too far.
Totally.
And you certainly have never made the type of talking head video that I do on TikTok.
Totally no.
All this is to say we have very different relationships to social media in this current day and age.
Yes.
And the podcast has been testing your comfort zone.
And my first foray into like putting myself out there this way. Totally.
Which you've done, let me just say, so gracefully.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But this, I think, was my first kind of road bump in what it's like to share yourself on the internet and not know how it's going to be received. Right. And that is, in essence, putting yourself into a vulnerable position and being vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that moment, and it relates to our episode number 7, 2 episodes ago, called Why We Follow Rules, Social Contracts, Trust, and Cooperation. Mm-hmm. And I had posted a clip of that episode for our socials in which we talked about the U.S.'s social contract, or the fact that by the virtue of our size, we have historically and kind of continued to struggle with consistently supporting each other as neighbors, as community members. We were, I think, kind of trying to make a commentary on the political divide that we all feel in this country now and historically have felt.
Let me just say also, your comments, I think, were more benign than perhaps the piece I shared in the clip, which was like, we're almost too big to ever believe that we could function cohesively. Let's clock that you are viewing your component of the real
as the problem.
As a problem, and I'm viewing mine.
Yeah, which is classic.
Yeah.
But all this to be said that when we posted this clip, it was lacking some of the context around the rest of the episode. And maybe also, I can say, we just didn't articulate ourselves as well as we could have.
So we get a notification saying that someone has commented on our reel, and they say, this is the type of opinion you get when you haven't been literally anywhere else. And I respond with a sassy remark saying, you seem lovely, Dylan. And then their response to that was far more serious in tone.
Their response to that was arguing that words we were using, or the framing of our argument, could be weaponized by someone in the United States who is anti-immigration, white nationalist. Like, it delved into this very scary realm where I was like, oh my God, that is like the absolute convolution and antithesis of what we were trying to speak to. But it was really scared. It made us, both of us, I think, instantly scared and feel vulnerable, because to be misinterpreted like that, especially by a stranger, and be called out, it felt shameful. And it also, I think, showed me a weakness in the way I had articulated something, which is scary, because that's always a possibility when you're putting your words out, both to a smaller group and then again to the public, that misinterpretation is possible.
Absolutely. He does not, nor does anyone really listening, except for our friends and family, have the background or the understanding of our perspectives, our lived experiences, our political leanings.
Yes.
So, of course, it could be misinterpreted, and it was a helpful wake-up call in that sense.
Totally. I was talking about it with my parents later. I was articulating how I worried we had not articulated ourselves enough for it to be clear.
Right.
My dad later on sent 2 speeches. I just think that it's powerful to hear 2 quotes from people. It's the words of people that spent a hell of a lot longer thinking about this and our social fabric of our country than we have. The first is a quote from a speech by Jesse Jackson, the civil rights hero. It's a quote from a speech he made in 1984 when he was running for president at the DNC. And he died recently, so Barack Obama just spoke at his funeral last week. So this particular speech was included in a recent newsletter from Heather Cox Richardson.
Okay.
Yeah. And in it, Jackson says, our flag is red, white, and blue, but our nation is a rainbow. Red, yellow, brown, black, and white, and we're all precious in God's sight. America is not like a blanket, one piece of unbroken cloth, the same color, the same texture, the same size. America is more like a quilt, many patches, many pieces, many colors, many sizes, all woven and held together by a common thread. We've experienced pain, but progress in fighting for that common thread. The patchwork, the quilt of America is what makes America beautiful. But to his point, we have to find the common thread.
Yeah.
Which leads me to the second quote that I want to pull from a speech that Robert F. Kennedy Sr. gave in Cleveland the day after MLK was assassinated. The quote I'm going to pull is, when you teach a man to hate and fear his brothers, when you teach that those who differ from you threaten your freedom or your job or your family, then you also learn to confront others not as fellow citizens but as enemies, to be met not with cooperation but with conquest. We learn at the last class to look at our brothers as aliens, men with whom we share a city but not a community, men bound to us in common dwelling but not in common effort. For all this, there are no final answers. So I think, again, we spoke so often 2 weeks ago in our episode about the potential power of the social contract in finding that cooperation, that common effort, that community in practice. That's never truly been achieved in the United States, but to have this idea in our mind as the goal to work with, I think is beautiful. And so I just wanted to elevate those people's words. I wish we'd had the opportunity to bring in those people's words in our episode. We didn't, so now I can pull it back now.
Perfect. I also think, as we'll get to in this episode, I found there was a layer of this that felt representative to me of a greater issue in terms of holding people to account online. And we'll get to that, but just a little sneak peek for you.
Yeah, I love that. So vulnerability, first things first, when I was looking forward to this episode, obviously I think in today's day and age, we all have a sense of the second meaning of vulnerability, which is what we're actually going to be talking about today. You know, the act of openly sharing deeply your personal thoughts, feelings, emotions, experiences with others, kind of letting down the barrier of any sort of facade or keeping things together, like being overly protective of this emotion.
Real.
Getting real. Okay, but then when you're actually looking up the definition of vulnerability, first of all, also in today's day and age, you type in vulnerability and it immediately brings up like cybersecurity patches and all this stuff. Is that by virtue of us being in San Francisco?
I think it's San Francisco and AI.
Yeah. But then you dive deeper. Okay, just give me the definition of vulnerability. And it's still, you know, the top Oxford Dictionary definition is the state of being exposed to physical or emotional harm or weakness in a system that can be exploited. It's a state of being exposed, potentially wounded, whether physically, emotionally, or within a technological system. And you don't really get that definition of the openness or allowing yourself to be without armor, authenticity. You get this kind of definition of first this exposure and then in a place of need of special care, support, or protection.
Right. It's like they had like a teenage boy right there.
Literally. And it's like, okay, we didn't add a third definition yet. Like, it's very surprising to me. But I think that goes to show how vulnerability went into our cultural lexicon in a very strictly negative light. And it's only recently in the past kind of decade that paradigm's been shifting.
Right.
So when we think about who started to shift the paradigm, my head goes to Brene Brown.
Yeah.
BB. She's the kind of the queen of vulnerability.
She's a research professor at the University of Houston's Graduate College of Social Work.
And also has her PhD in social work.
Yep.
She's a professor, a researcher, a lecturer. And her
Swiss Army knife.
Biggest break was in 2010 when she did a TED Talk in Houston on vulnerability. She'd been doing research, kind of trying to understand human connection. She was like, that's why we're here. This is our biggest purpose. All the research shows that we are hardwired to need connection.
Yeah.
And so she was trying to understand what is our biggest barrier to connection, and it's shame and fear. The fear being, I'm not good enough, or I'm not ever going to get the connection that I need because I'm not good enough. But what she was seeing was that there are thousands and thousands of stories and focus groups and people who are constantly feeling worthy, like they are worthy of connection no matter what. She was trying to understand, like, people can be really kind of broken into two groups: the people that believe that they're worthy of connection and so achieve it, and those that feel that they're not worthy of connection. And because she was trying to understand what makes that group of people who inherently feel worthy, what drives them, what makes them tick, because I want everyone to have that special sauce.
What a baller.
Totally. And what she found was that really it comes down to three things. Courage. They're courageous because, and she talks about in the TED Talk, the formal definition or the original origins of the word courage. Cor means heart, and cœur in French. Cool. And rudge, which I actually don't know what this is, but like the other part of the word is like telling, like storytelling.
I hated my laugh there. Sorry.
I got you going. And so courage, if you break that down, is telling the story of who you are with your whole heart. Beautiful. And then connection, they all experience connection as a result of authenticity. That's how they kind of articulated that ability to have connection was a result of authenticity. And then this was a key point she made, is that they all believed that what made them vulnerable made them beautiful. They weren't afraid of vulnerability as a weakness. They articulated vulnerability as being essential for connection. So she suddenly had this aha moment that she'd been going to do research about connection, and what she'd actually stumbled into was the need, the absolute imperative of vulnerability to drive human connection, love, happiness, support, etc., which is something that she was deeply afraid to interrogate in and of herself.
Wow. Wow. Because she's famously an introvert.
And also she was like, I just did not think I wasn't someone who was going to hear that and say, okay, let's try to live more vulnerably. I was someone who was going to rail against that. Like,
that's so true. She's so badass. She's very cut and dry. She's like, it's so fun to listen to her talk about these squishier topics because there's some tone that's very matter of fact with her. The dichotomy makes it really easy to take in the information about the squishy stuff.
Well, and also because she's a rigorous researcher. She's done so much research to try to add numbers to the stories that build up to be the impact of her research on squishier topics, which is really cool.
People are like, I'm speaking from the heart here. And she's like, no, here's the facts.
Here's 13,000 stories that are going to validate that this is the collective experience. Right. And this whole TED Talk blew up, like 1 million views. And suddenly...
we need to do like an inflation
what did blow
conversion.
Up now versus then?
1 million views is nothing, but yeah.
Well, it was on YouTube in 2010. It was 2010.
What's it called?
Brene
Brown
on vulnerability or something. Power of vulnerability.
Now it has 24 million.
Yeah. It blew up at first, and suddenly she was in the public eye. She had never tried to live in the public eye because she talks about the fact that she herself had a lot of shame and fear around being too seen. She did an interview with Oprah, and she said, I love this quote, "Everyone has something that they imagine would be so hurtful to hear someone say about you, so you do whatever you could to prevent them from having the opportunity to say that." So she was living her life very much like, I'm never going to let anyone see too much of me so they could say something about me. And suddenly this video blew up, and people were ruthless in the comments. So mean. She was just bullied online. Obviously she was celebrated too, but the way our brains work, the bullying sticks way faster and deeper. And she was in this dark hole, had to just curl up within herself and take the weekend, and was just binging Downton Abbey to try to make herself feel better.
Obsessed.
And being the researcher that she is, she finished the season, was like, who was the president of the United States during this time? And that brought her down into a whole rabbit hole around Teddy Roosevelt. And she came across the daring greatly quote, which from Teddy Roosevelt. I think a lot of people have heard it. It's a real jumping off point for her around the fact that vulnerability is the same thing as courage, which I don't think had ever really been the paradigm. And she'd been saying before in her TED Talk, vulnerability is important for connection, but she'd never switched it on its head to say vulnerability is courage. So the quote from Teddy Roosevelt is, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly." It goes on to say, "If he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who knew neither victory nor defeat." And so that inspired her to go on to write her famous book, Daring Greatly, which argues that vulnerability, the uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, is her definition, is not weakness, but our most accurate measure of courage. I think that journey of that story, especially because we're talking about this in social media, the fact that she was so inspired by her own experience of being vulnerable online, then led her on to this massive journey of completely rewriting what vulnerability means and its power in our culture.
That reminded me a little bit of in Untamed. Glennon Doyle talks about how bravery is not being scared and doing something anyway, and to define it as such for our kids is a mistake.
Totally.
Like, you were so brave that you jumped off the zipline platform. This is coming from internal experience.
You jumped off a zipline platform?
I famously never jumped off any, because I was like, I'm actually going to go down because that's what's going to make me happy. Actually, to me, that is brave, to be able to combat the social expectations and my image being marred. And Glennon Doyle makes the same point, that vulnerability, or I guess here I'm conflating vulnerability with a sense of intuition and hearing to your internal constitution. That is far more brave than doing the like risky behavior that you're told is bravery.
I love that though, because intuition, you had to expose your own, your knowing, and you had to expose that knowing to others in order to say, no, I won't do that. And that in and of itself is being vulnerable. It's that exposure of your true self.
Yeah. Brene also coined this term vulnerability hangover, which is meant to, this is a quote from the New York Times, to describe the anxiety, shame, and regret felt after divulging something personal. I feel like all of us have had some form of that, whether it was just in like a conversation with friends or strangers, or whether it was online, bigger scale. Something that she shares tips about the vulnerability hangover and how to alleviate the symptoms of it is to know that people probably aren't thinking about your disclosure as much as you are.
So true.
That phenomenon is called the beautiful mess effect. Ooh. That we generally view our own displays of vulnerability more negatively than those of others. The researchers who first described the beautiful mess effect also found that people who practiced self-compassion felt less critical of their own perceived messes than those who didn't. I feel like that is something I have started to exercise as I've aged, but really did not have a handle on when I was younger. Practicing self-compassion, and that I will out loud, like this morning even, I woke up and was kind of late to get going. And I was like, okay, baby, here we go. I said it out loud. And then I literally out loud after that said, I just called myself baby. Baby.
God, I wish I was in your apartment for that whole exchange.
Well, you're here now, honey. But it's just so funny.
Did you laugh out loud?
I laughed out loud.
Oh, it's cute.
And I really felt comforted by calling myself baby. Research suggests that while we tend to focus in the short term on things we wish we hadn't done, our longer term regrets are about the things we didn't do, which I feel like everyone says that at the end of your life, when you're on your deathbed, you're going to be thinking of the shots you didn't take. And apparently research corroborates that. But then this article was talking about how the problem is talking about ourselves feels good. So revealing vulnerable information about ourselves actually gives us
a positive rush of emotions or something?
Yeah. For instance, in one small 2012 study, participants who were given money to answer questions found it so rewarding to broadcast their thoughts that they gave up 25% of the payment to share their answers instead of keeping them private.
God, that's
so
embarrassing.
My team. Me.
I know, but it's also kind of like exactly what we're doing in this podcast.
What?
Sharing our thoughts.
Exactly.
But there's something beautiful about
we want
this.
To be heard.
Yeah.
The zeitgeist, there's like a bit of a oversharing tendency, like losing the plot.
Totally. And I think it's super different vulnerability as a concept versus vulnerability tied to the platform of social media, which we can transition to now. But we had to start with the benefits of vulnerability to kind of understand why it's become such a thing on social media. I want to start by reading out this quote that Brene Brown says, where she makes the distinction around what vulnerability is and what it is not. She says, vulnerability is not letting it all hang out. It's about trust, intimacy, and connections we share with people who have earned the right to hear the story. And I think that's...
Say that one more time.
Vulnerability is not letting it all hang out. It's about trust, intimacy, and connections we share with people who have earned the right to hear the story.
That hits.
It hits. And I think we get confused around who has earned the right to hear the story in the age of social media.
Right. Well, I think we weigh that less heavily than we weigh the good feelings we get from sharing.
Yes. And I think social media is preying on elements of our brain that can trick us into thinking we're going to get what we need out of being vulnerable online.
Absolutely.
Psychologists have done research on the 3 components of healthy vulnerability. To really get the benefits of vulnerability, you need to receive 3 key responses after the act of being vulnerable. Okay. Otherwise, you can get into a scared or shut down cycle where you fall into the need to be in the safe zone rather than the vulnerable zone, which are validation, appreciation, and reciprocation. They call it VAR. Like I was saying, I think people think they're going to receive validation, appreciation, and reciprocation online, and they're not.
Right.
They can in some instances, but so often I think we're being tricked into thinking like social media is where people go to get validation. We go there to get that quick hit of dopamine on likes, shares, comments. We could conflate social media validation with the validation required after being vulnerable. Like, and they're two very different. Exactly. They're two very different things.
It's off-brand.
It's off-brand validation. Yeah. And also suddenly it changes the nature of instead of validation being the thing that you bring to someone who's been vulnerable, it's changed the narrative that for some, you're being vulnerable to receive validation. It's completely altering the steps of the vulnerability process.
Yeah, it's really challenging to achieve the validation, appreciation, and reciprocation online. And it requires like a genuine connection. I think a lot of people make a bid for that and end up in the fear zone because it is not completed. I kind of want to get into the side of social media response to quote unquote vulnerability. I say quote unquote because sometimes people are sharing truly vulnerably, and sometimes, like you've said, it's this kind of a facade of vulnerability. And often either version of that receives a response of outrage at times from big audiences online. So I was doing some research into why it is that there's so much moral outrage on social media in response to bids for connection, like sharing vulnerably or attempting to get people to believe that you are sharing vulnerably. That makes sense?
Yeah,
okay.
That makes sense. And I'm interested to see what you heard.
So there was a Yale study. Researchers looked at 12.7 million tweets from over 7,000 Twitter users to test whether users expressed more outrage over time, and if so, why. And these millions of tweets found that people learned to post more outrage over time because they receive likes and shares for it. So this is kind of getting at the fact that moral outrage is socially rewarded online.
So crazy.
I know. And platforms create a reinforcement loop. So when moral outrage gets the engagement, like the likes and the shares, users are then rewarded and then they repeat the behavior.
Right.
So the platform is subtly teaching you outrage equals attention equals status.
Yeah.
And calm or nuanced responses rarely go as far. I was finding myself reflect on the fact that it does feel like people are often more interested in pointing the finger and in blaming rather than in true redemption and learning and maybe even repentance. It feels like there's often online a desire, like an urge to chastise and reprimand. And I was curious why that is the case. Like, what is it that makes us prone to calling people out?
When on the flip side, we go to share online for a desire for connection and community.
Right.
So the two opposite sides of the participation scale of social media are leveraged on two very different sides of what you're trying to get out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is fascinating.
This got into some talk about Schadenfreude, which is, I don't actually know what the origin of that is. Is it German?
Sounds German.
Let me look.
Schadenfreude. I would have
Schadenfreude.
I thought it was Schadenfreude.
No. Schadenfreude is the complex emotion of deriving joy, pleasure, or self-satisfaction from the misfortune, failure, or humiliation of others.
Oh,
so
God.
awful.
We don't really have a single word for that, do we, in the English language?
This is like Hygge. We use Schadenfreude. Yeah. So shaming can feel psychologically satisfying, and that is what Schadenfreude pulls on. There was some research here that suggested that public shaming is partly driven by hedonic motives. It gives you like pleasure. Yeah, nice. One study published in the Social Science Research Journal found that online shaming was strongly linked to Schadenfreude. It's seen as like a balancing of the scales. So people perceive that someone did something wrong. Say at some point in their sharing vulnerably, they made a misstep in some of their words and people took issue with that, whatever it may be. They feel that that person deserves consequences, and then they watch them suffer, and that restores a sense of justice to them.
Wow.
Another piece in the realm of moral outrage and what it gives us to tell people what you shared is too much or what you shared is wrong is that public punishment signals group membership. So it signals, I know the norms, I belong to the group, kind of getting at what we talked about a couple weeks ago with the social contract. It's proving that I am aware of the rules to the extent that I can understand when someone else is not adhering to them, and I'm going to make sure that they do, and that will make you believe that I'm part of the group.
It's an in-group, out-group thing. Like, you feel more safe in the in-group if you are pointing fingers.
Something that I will reflect on when I see people going at someone on social media is it seems that a lot of people have a desire to blame and point fingers and are less concerned with one's redemption or ultimate learning.
There's no other part of that circle that is that
redemption
people
arc.
People don't care about the redemption arc, it sounds like.
I actually had this moment a couple years ago, and this is another piece of how oversharing is so tempting online, or sharing bold opinions is so tempting because that's what the algorithm ultimately incentivizes.
Yeah.
But I was sharing something about an interviewer. I didn't name anyone, but I said, I noticed in some pretty famous podcast hosts episode this week that they were inquiring about someone's deep-seated trauma in a way that felt pretty flippant and poorly navigated. And I was kind of making the point, like, I feel like people should kind of stay in their lane in terms of what they are capable of delicately probing about. Like, if it's related to trauma, capital T, I was making the point that there should be specific people who inquire about that. And someone commented being like, that's not a growth mindset. And I felt bad, and I kept thinking about it. And the next morning I woke up, I messaged them from my account and was like, I just want wanting you to know, like, I really thought through your comment again and reconsidered. And I think you're right. Like, it wasn't really a growth mindset. And it was, I take it back. And I made a video talking about how I had changed my mind. And people actually responded really well to that, being like, it's so refreshing to see someone actually own up when they got something wrong and reconsider their opinion. But it's so rare that we see people praised or validated for going back on their word.
But I also think just because
integrating feedback.
We terrify people from saying anything to begin with. It feels like we're a split internet in terms of those that are sharing, those that are afraid to share, and then those that aren't considering the consequences of their sharing. Along this vein, I saw a video recently of a health and beauty influencer saying, I don't like that all of these beauty influencers are being pressured to speak out around politics. That's not our area of expertise. And this woman responded with one of the most eloquent responses, basically saying, well, first of all, you're not a dermatologist, you're not a doctor, you're not a whatever, but you feel comfortable speaking out and influencing on those topics. Second of all, politics is foundational to how we move through our world. It is pervasive. And if you care about your children's future, if you care about access to clean water, if you care about having clean air to breathe, you care about politics. And we are living in a time, we've always lived in a time, but we're especially seeing it now that like people shouldn't stay silent. These things matter and you need people with platforms to say things. I don't know the politics of this woman who is saying, I don't want to speak out, but I think she is experiencing fear of having a stance on something. There's this element of fear of cancellation that pervades everything. And it's hard because we're both in a time of oversharing, vulnerability online, and the moral outrage piece also shuts people down.
I saw this TikTok comment a while back saying, I hate how society is obsessed with humbling women. And it hit something deep in my soul, because part of what I was getting at in starting to talk about moral outrage online is that it really does feel like women bear the brunt of that more than men. Ooh. And the phrasing, I hate how society is obsessed with humbling women. Keeping us humble, keeping us in our place. And women do it to women. I feel like Elise Lunan from last week would have great stuff to say about this. I think that women discipline and police other women to an extent that they do not other men, at least historically, because we have all been taught collectively to chastise and reprimand and police women.
We bear the brunt most often of apologizing for things, even when it is not our mess to clean up.
So like the original sin.
Yeah, exactly.
That was Eve, not Adam.
That was Eve who originally sinned. She ate the apple.
Yeah. Greedy little bitch. Did I tell you about the old lady, the pictures of the old lady?
No.
Okay. Yesterday I saw this video and first page of the carousel said something along the lines of, just got access to my grandma's old Mac. And then each subsequent card on the carousel was either a picture of her grandma being sweet with her kitty, or it was these little private notes that she had on her computer. And some of them were unbelievably vulnerable. One was talking about how aging is so embarrassing. And I actually think that the grandmother is maybe a poet or does creative writing on the side, because a lot of them had some kind of a rhythmic element to them. So perhaps this granddaughter was sharing her grandma's art and that was consented to. But there was a comment that said, this is way too vulnerable for TikTok. And it had 30,000 likes at the time. And then people underneath it with far fewer likes were saying, you are so based in ego. Like, we are nothing. All we are what we share with others. She's sharing this because it has meaning to her. They were getting very existential. I don't know. It was so interesting to see the divide there between some people responding saying, this is too much for social media. You've lost the plot. And some people being like, no, this is meaningful. And I find this so beautiful to have insight into an older person's reflections like this. To me, what really rubbed me the wrong way was that she was sharing on her grandma's behalf. And it wasn't clear to me whether that was consented to.
It feels like the line between vulnerability and overshare has gotten blurred online, because we're not taking the time to realize, back to the concept of the audience, is this audience deserving of my honesty or truth?
Yeah.
Have they earned the right to hear the story?
Right.
You can't vet that with every single person who has access to
You have no control.
You have no control over that. So
unless you're private.
Right. And at the same time, we know for a fact that there are stories that are told on social media every single day that make people feel less alone.
Yeah. I know.
So it's such a fine balancing act, and I don't really know how would you articulate the difference between the overshare versus the vulnerability?
I have plenty of anecdotes. I'll share a little bit later, but I think people often claim to know when someone is doing one or the other, and I actually think we probably have very little accurate insight into when someone is... You don't know what someone's emotional experience is when they're posting.
I wonder if it's that when someone's seeing something shared on the internet or on social media that they can relate to, it can feel like a positive vulnerability, but if it's something they can't relate to, it feels like an overshare. I think we've really done ourselves a disservice by not all getting on the same page of what should be shared and what shouldn't, because every time someone shares their art, they're being vulnerable.
Yeah.
And we've been sharing art since the dawn of time. As humans, it's how we make sense of our world and each other.
That phrase, like, woo, it scratches something.
You like it? You like dawn of time?
The dawn of time. The end of time. You know what that's from?
No.
There was a legend on a soul.
Wow, you sound great. What was that?
It's from School of Rock.
Never seen it.
You've never seen it?
No.
I want to watch you watch it.
That's a lot of pressure.
That's how I do.
This has never been a problem before. Like, we've never told a poet, oof,
never.
Too vulnerable. Well, it's just so ubiquitous now that it's almost...
The policing of it.
The policing of it. Like, it's
the
almost...
public policing.
It's devaluing vulnerability as a whole. Like, the backlash against vulnerability on social media is doing a disservice to all of the power of vulnerability outside of social media. That's my fear.
That I totally get that.
That if we're here demonizing vulnerability on social media, which, by the way, I agree that there is a pandemic of oversharing and a pandemic
epidemic.
An epidemic.
Are those the same? I don't know, but it's scary to hear pandemic.
I shan't say the P word.
Shan't.
There's an epidemic of oversharing on social media
Agreed.
that is wrapped up in the name of being vulnerable. And that does a disservice, though, to the word vulnerability.
Absolutely.
And makes me worried that people are going to have a backlash against vulnerability as a whole outside of social media and even within social media in places where it does a service.
Yeah.
I saw this video of this influencer who is actually a friend of Luis's cousin in Mexico City, who became a popular influencer when he posted a video. Truly, this video is what broke him out. It's a video of him talking about how he realized that in every single photo he and his friends took, he had his thumb up. They were all doing... What?
Really sweet to reflect on, and I feel like I know where it's going.
So he realized that he and all of his friends always had their thumbs up. He flashed through a collage of photos of him and his friends in all different settings. They all have their left or right hand up and their little soft smile. And he said, my first inclination was to make a video about how boys can't pose. But he got a text from a friend saying, how are you? And he typed, fine. But he reflected, I didn't want to say fine. I wasn't feeling fine. He didn't go into specifics, but he was just feeling like, wow, I want to get into more details.
Yeah.
But that's not my inclination to go there with my closest people. In the same way that my inclination in a photo is just to do a thumbs up, like all is fine.
Yeah.
And so he made this beautiful monologue about how he wants to be the friend that is there for when his friends aren't fine and to hear honestly and truthfully how they're feeling. And vice versa. He wants to share honestly and truthfully how he's feeling. And it was just a call really to men to start to dig for that vulnerability in their friendships. In a way that was so beautiful. And it wasn't him necessarily being vulnerable in an overshare way at all, but he was being vulnerable about his experience of vulnerability in a way that was super powerful.
Wow, I love that. I also love how he's talking about it on the scale that is feasible. Like, to do that between friends.
Yes.
To make that change and go from saying fine to elaborating more on your emotional state is so healthy to me. What's not healthy to me is when people say, this is such a trope now. People are like, have you ever noticed how when someone asks you how you're doing, you just say fine, I'm good. But there's so much under the surface. I'm like, I'm not going to be telling my barista.
Totally.
What my, like, that's where we lose the plot.
Totally. And that's where we cheapen vulnerability.
Specific.
Again, have they earned the right? And do they want to know the story?
Right.
It's not just earn the right. It's are they going to give you the validation, appreciation, and reciprocity that's needed of being vulnerable?
Absolutely.
I think that's why the VAR model is kind of helpful.
And if you're seeking bids from strangers to give you that response, I think that's misguided because it will also land shallowly. Like, that's not going to touch the deeper part of yourself that really does need that validation, appreciation, reciprocity.
Yeah.
So I think the people who encourage you to, like, say really what you're feeling to every Tom, Dick, and Harry, I don't really buy it.
amongst
Our barometer is
strangers.
off.
Yeah, because social media is making our barometer off.
Yeah.
I think Brene Brown might agree with me on this. And I think she actually definitely would agree with me on this. Deep connection between people that really know each other. And that can be in the context of not just your safest, most intimate relationships. It could also be amongst coworkers, etc. But people that you spend a lot of time with, that connection needs vulnerability.
Yeah.
Connection between strangers walking down the street doesn't necessarily. It doesn't require, and it shouldn't have vulnerability.
Yeah.
Like, you can care for people around you and be kind to people around you and make them feel good without getting vulnerable.
I love that. True.
And also, I think it's just so, it takes time to realize that you can be seen without being vulnerable all the time.
Yes, totally.
In different contexts.
My therapist used to talk to me about this a lot because I had, and I'm so glad to be able to say this past tense, I had this really strong desire to be understood and seen by everyone.
Yeah.
And so it felt like the litmus test in my brain that was determining when I would share something vulnerable and with whom was broken. So I would share. I'm so grateful that I didn't have the platform where my choices like that could be scrutinized, because I think especially in your early 20s, you're pretty susceptible, or at least I was. My frontal lobe had not fully developed, and I totally would have posted about an ex. And I did. Like, you can go back and look at the receipts I posted. I overshared my fair share.
And was that in the name of being vulnerable, do you think?
Some of it was in the name of being vulnerable, but candidly, a lot of that was like in order to be perceived in a certain light by my community. I'm glad that I maintained a small audience during that time so that I didn't end up incurring consequences down the line that I wouldn't want to be saddled with.
Yeah.
I feel like my friends, you guys actually did a great job of helping me come back down to earth in those moments where you were like, you don't necessarily need to talk about this most recent diagnosis online, but in a gentle, loving way, because you had my best interests at heart. Right. And also, hilariously, I'm literally the only person in all of our friends who has an online presence like that to that degree.
Yeah.
And so you guys all, like, you're touching grass on a much more regular basis than I am. And it really helps being surrounded by people whose feet are firmly planted on the ground and not
heads
in
under
the
rocks.
Digital world. Yeah. Lord knows I suffer for it.
Ostrich in the sand. Are those the animals that put their heads in the sand?
I think so.
That's me. I'm an ostrich.
Ultimately, you're right. It's all about right-sizing our vulnerability for a given moment.
Totally.
And understanding contextually what is appropriate when, and that is person to person.
Yes.
And it's easy to judge other people for their assessment of when vulnerability is warranted and to what extent. And I think we all will be best suited by understanding and getting in touch with what is our version of the barometer there. Like, what do I feel most comfortable with? And part of that event I referenced in an earlier episode of me sharing online too vulnerably. If you want to read about that, you can look at my Substack. I talk about it in a post called Naked in the Town Square. But part of the beauty of that event was it helped me recalibrate what was a comfortable level of vulnerability online for me, because I had lost the fucking plot, like, majorly. And I think many of us would benefit from looking within. And I think if you just ask yourself, why am I posting this? Who am I posting it for? It's okay if that answer, it would be, I think, strange if the only reason you were posting it was for the good of the people. There is some degree of spectacle and enjoying being seen and understood by others. And that's fair. That's, as we've talked about, a human instinct. But I do think all of us could benefit from interrogating our why before posting, and might end up with less regret that way.
And also think it's not letting ourselves, as a culture right now, get so cynical about vulnerability online that we forget the power of vulnerability and the necessity of vulnerability.
Absolutely.
In our interpersonal relationships all the time. There's such a difference. I love you.
I love you.
Thank you, Phoebe Fry, for this episode's music.
And thank you, Emily Kiernan, for the beautiful cover art.
If you like this episode, please like, share, and leave a comment. And we'll see you next week.